Remington Smith. I'm with Diversified. We're going to be doing black box training today. We'll start with an overview of infrastructure in the room as well as loose parts, and then we're going to transition over and look at the rack, and then we'll come back here and cover operation in the space. So starting with just what's physically mounted in the space, you have 4 plates on each of the walls in the space. The front plate at the front location here, or what someone deemed was the front, it's a black box, so there's not really a front, but has 2 mic jacks. Every other location is just a network port, so it's a locking RJ45 connector, so that the cable can't get unplugged. Those are for plugging in your mixer, so you can plug into it and have access using the rack-mounted mixer. On the ceiling, you've got 4 speakers, and on the wall over here is your system controller, a little black box that says Crestron on it. Control there is very simple, which we'll get into in a little bit. You have 2 modes, manual mode and auto mode, so you can use the system with or without the mixer. As far as loose parts, you've got 20 of the ALS devices. So ALS is assisted listening. Each one of these units, there will be a charger as well for these. It was on back order, so it's forthcoming, but they just charge with a standard micro USB like a lot of phones do. When you power the unit on, it's for people who have who need hearing aids, that sort of thing, so they can hear what's going on. It functions either with a T-coil or with an earpiece. There's earpieces in the box here, which we'll get to in a minute. There are a number of different ALS systems that we've installed throughout the school. So make sure when you turn the unit on that it says, if you tap the button on the top, it'll show up and say black box. When you click on it, it's going to show you what unit number it is, battery mount, and then your room location. So obviously if you have one that says commons, it's not going to work in here, or gym or theater. You want to make sure you have ones that say black box.
Are these just for this room, or are these
correct? These are just for this room. They can be deployed if you felt that you wanted to use them in a different space. You could use the software and reconfigure them so that you could use them in the commons or the gym. These particular ones can't be used in the theater just because they're different frequency ranges, but you're welcome to use them wherever you want. Once we turn them over, they're yours to manage. So we'll set those there. Inside the box of goodies here is where the wireless mics are for this room currently. It'll be up to you guys where you decide you want to store them, obviously. But you have 2 varieties of microphones. You have handheld microphones, 58 capsule. They currently have alkaline batteries in them. You can run them on rechargeables, or you can run them on, Shure has some rechargeable batteries as well, which are pretty slick because they'll tell you exactly how many minutes you have left, which is really handy. There's no guessing of how long a bar is going to last. You can look at it and go, okay, I've got 45 minutes, and it'll run exactly 45 minutes. Pretty cool. So you can get the batteries and chargers for those separately. They're kind of cool too because you can actually dock the microphones in them. And they also tell you how many cycles you have left on the battery, so you can guess, you can budget accordingly for when you need to replace those. So you've got the 2 handhelds there, and they're labeled for which mic number they are, 1 through 4. You've got 6, I believe it's 6, standard SM58s. All of the equipment that we're going through is stuff that was spec'd by the consultant that designed the system. So there's some things that weren't included that you'll want to get, things like mic cables, or mic stands. Those are things that weren't included in their list of materials, so you'll want to procure those separately. Then you've got 2 lav mics that are available in this space. And they have a standard Shure clip-on type. They'll work with any headset microphone, so if you wanted to use headsets instead, or wig mics, or whatever you wanted to do, you could switch those out for Countryman capsules or DPA or whatever your preference was. So you've got 2 of those for this space. And as I mentioned, you've got a bunch of the wired 58s. In the box here, we've got a whole stack, 1 for each of those units, of single earbuds that plug into those units, so that if they need the listening assist device and they don't have hearing aids, they can use the earbud. They also work with any type of headphone. So I test them with my in-ear monitors. I've seen people use Apple headphones. They don't work as well, but they'll work as well. And then the other thing that is in the loose parts here is they included 2 kind of Britney Spears style headset microphones. I'm not sure why that was their choice for a headset microphone, but that's what you've got as far as headsets are concerned currently. Nice thing about those, especially with proximity to the speakers, is they're super stable because they are cardioid. So their pickup pattern is in front of the capsule, whereas a lot of headset like Countryman microphones are omnidirectional. So it gives you a little bit better control. The system is tuned such that you shouldn't have any issues with feedback within reason. You can get pretty loud without any issues.
Okay.
So that's loose pieces in the box. So I'll set these things back in here. The other thing that we're required to provide you is an ALS sign that you can hang in the room if you want to, or outside the room. ALS is an accessibility requirement, so we're required to install them in any spaces that seat over a certain number of people. So. So this is the mixer rack. There's 4 latches, 1 on each corner. There's also 4 more latches on the very bottom, so you could take it off the casters if you wanted to. Set it on something to raise it up, set it on a table, whatever your preference is. Lid just lifts off like that. Inside the rack, you have a Soundcraft SI Expression. This is the same mixer that we have in the Commons, in the gym, and it's the little brother to the one that's in the theater. So operation of all the consoles on campus is very similar. So as you get used to one, you'll get used to the others. This one is programmed similarly to the layout of all the other ones as well. And when we're done, I have because these smaller mixers don't have an LCD screen that tells you what the channel names are, I also have an Excel spreadsheet that I'll give you that has your channel assignments. They are labeled, so you can go through the screen and see that, which we'll go over when we do training, operational training. But the front of the rack and the back of the rack have these little doors that you've got notches in the bottom that the door slides in and little nubs that it presses up against. There's not a whole lot in this rack. There's a power conditioner up at the top. Otherwise, you've got open spaces that you could mount equipment in if you wanted to. Overall, this is a pretty simple little rack. Pulling off the back, in the back of the rack, you've got your power cord for the power conditioner that you can plug into the wall. And then you have a locking, just like a mic cable, locking connector, network cable for your mixer. It's plugged in and laced into the rack for passing audio in and out of the system. All systems in all of the spaces are Dante based, so they use an audio over IP architecture through a network switch. Everything's pre-configured, so there's not a whole lot you'll need to do there. However, if you If you run into any issues with it, you can reach out to support and they'll help you out with it. If you're adding equipment in, we do recommend contacting a certified Dante engineer or reaching out to us so that we can assist with it so that you keep all your systems operating, because there's some know-how required on the back end for Dante. It's fairly intuitive, but without certification, you can cause yourself some heartache, so just be aware. So that's everything in this space as far as AV is concerned. Before we head upstairs, do you have any questions in here on loose parts and the space? Okay. So my name is Remington Smith. I'm with Diversified. We're going to be going over the black box section of the control room rack. So in this system, in this rack lives all of the equipment for both theaters, both for the black box and the main auditorium. You've got two power conditioners. Top one is power for your auditorium system. Bottom one is power conditioner for your black box system. There's nothing that needs to be powered or turned on and off in here. It can just run all the time. It's designed for that. Most of the equipment that we're going to be looking at lives in this section right here. So this is your equipment that manages the system that's over in the black box. So this is an antenna distribution unit that takes your 4 wireless mics and sends them or receives their signals from the handheld transmitters through the antennas that are mounted in the space. So as a note, if you were to try to use those, say in the commons or in here, they probably would not work because of going through walls or line of sight. So that would require some rewiring of equipment to do that. As far as this device here, this is the system processor, the DSP for the speakers and the mics that are in that space. And then the left unit here is the ALS receiver for that room. And then the very bottom amplifier in the rack is the amplifier that powers the speakers in that space. So if for some reason you come in, your bottom power is turned off, amp doesn't have lights, wireless mics don't have lights, they're powered off of this unit here. And if any of that equipment isn't working, isn't turned on, that would be that could cause problems with your system. In the back of the rack, is a rear-mounted network switch mid-rack here. So I'm going to rotate it this way so the camera can see it. You can see the network switch here. If the system, as I mentioned, it's network-based, so if there's if you're having issues with the system and it's not operating correctly, you would want to power cycle that switch. Just unplug the power and plug it back in. A lot of times that'll fix an issue. So rotating it this way so you can see that's your network switch there. You should see a combination of solid yellow, which is indicating PoE, and flashing green lights. If you're not getting signal through the system, one of the troubleshooting steps is rebooting the switch. Okay. There's a little rack light mounted in the rack here. It's not plugged in right now, but there's a rack light so you can see what's going on if you have the lights off in here. Alright, so that is everything for your architecture portion of the training, and we'll head back over and go over the operational side and then do Q&A. Okay. With your simple mode or auto mode, if you will, when you come in, there's really 3 functions to this. There's volume up, volume down, and mute button. So if the mute button is lit, you're in auto mode. If the mute button is not lit, then you're going to be, or rather, sorry, other way around. If the mute button is unlit, you're in auto mode. So it mutes the auto mode selection of the microphones there and sends them to the console. If it's unlit, this becomes your volume control here, and it's got a little bar graph on the bottom to indicate what it's doing. So again, right now we're in auto mode because it's not lit blue. If you select blue, then you go to console mode. And so what it does inside the DSP is that flips the audio routes from going from the microphones straight to the speakers through an auto mixer to the console. So it just breaks that path and shifts them to the console, and then you have manual control over the operation. So we'll start with the auto mode. Best practice when you're starting up the system is to go ahead and leave it muted. Then you can plug in a microphone, which I did not bring a mic cable with me, but you can plug into either of the two auto mix jacks here with one of those wired 58s and use the system. You can also use the handheld microphones, so we'll use those for demonstration today. Those are in the box here. And they all go through an auto mixer, so as they're being used, if you were to use all four of them simultaneously, it'll automatically kind of adjust volumes for you or mute them if they're not in use. So it's threshold based, so once the audio gets over a certain level, it'll open up the microphone, reducing the possibility of feedback because you don't have as many microphone capsules open at the same time. So flip on your microphone, obviously check your battery power, select your power on, and then you've got audio coming out of the speakers. And as I mentioned, this is your microphone transmitter. Your antennas are mounted on the wall here. You've got 3 antennas total, 2 for diversity, A and B for the wireless mics, and then 1 for the ALS. Then you've got your volume control, so you can get up to a pretty decent volume. This system it's got a lot of horsepower. So when I did the volume, the max volume recording, it recorded at like 109 dB, which is louder than most concerts. So you've got full volume control over the microphones on the controller here. And the max volume is set up so that whatever you're doing with the system, if you're using all the microphones, it's going to keep it below the feedback threshold. So again, if you hit the mute button, it's going to cut the audio in your auto mode, and it's going to send it over to the console. So unlike with analog systems where you had a particular order in which things had to be powered on and powered off, which was because of the electrical current that was passing through the mic lines or audio lines. We don't have that same functionality. So in the digital world, when you power stuff on and off, it just stops sending ones and zeros. So there's no audio pop. It doesn't matter what order you do things in when you're plugging things in. So as I mentioned, you've got 2 cables in the back of your rack. You've got a blue and black cable that is your power conditioner. Plug it into any of the outlets in the room. And once you have power, you'll see a green flashing power light here. You've got your locking connector. There's a little nub at the top that locks in, and it goes to the top. It just clicks in, just like a mic cable. Then you can power on the mixer, and the light will go green, solid green. Screen will light up. It takes about 30 seconds for it to boot up. So it's going to go through its startup process. You'll hear it click, and then it's going to get a progress bar, and it'll do its thing. While it does that, I'm just going to grab that wireless mic one more time. So as I mentioned, each of the wireless mics is labeled. This one's labeled Black Box 2. So each of them has a designation of what receiver it's tied to. And the naming follows across on the various locations. So wireless mic 2, if you are stepping up to the mixer, you don't happen to have that spreadsheet in front of you, it's going to open up to your main menu screen. On the main menu screen at the upper right corner and the second one down, outputs, if you have an output selected, like your left right, you can select it. It's going to tell you what you're looking at, which is your main left right, and it's going to tell you where it's going. If you select a channel, it's going to tell you what your input setup is. And if you jump back here and go to menu, let's select one that's actually got something assigned to it. Inputs, it's going to say wireless 1 on channel 1. If you go to 2, 2, so on and so forth. Once you get up here, then you've got your 2 wired mics that are on the wall there. And then your channels continuing on are just off the back of the unit, so you could plug in whatever professional audio equipment you wanted there. So selecting mic 2, because that's the one I have in my hand. Looking at your controls here, you have your input gain here, so you have fan and power if you're running a condenser microphone. You've got a phase reverse if you're like if you have a mic cable that's wired backwards and it sounds odd, you can phase reverse it. Then you've got your trim and a high pass filter. High pass filter is bypassable, so if the button is lit, you're operational. If it's unlit, it's not operational. Next section over is the gate, which is a dynamic processor. What it does is it's essentially an automatic mute. And then you've got a compressor, which is essentially an automatic fader. So instead of moving the fader yourself, you're allowing the machine to do it for you. Equalizer gives you the ability to shape the tone of the sound however you want it to sound, ideally making it sound natural unless you're doing something creative, and then you can make it sound weird. And then output, you've got delay on each channel as well as pan. In this particular system, it is technically stereo, so you could pan from one side to the other if you wanted to create that effect, or if you wanted a mic to come out of only one side. It's set up as 2 stereo pairs. You have left and right, and they're both speakers on the left and the right are tied together. So to go through operationally, first step when you walk up to the mixer is turn on whatever your source is, see where your signal's at. You want to be, you know, right now I'm not talking very loud, so I'm coming in a little bit low. I could turn it up a little bit if I wanted to. You'll see that it indicates on the mixer what your volume is. You want to shoot for right in the ballpark of minus 24 to minus 12. You'll notice minus 12 turns yellow, so that kind of is indicating that you're getting a little bit higher. For this room, I have balanced out the gain level on it, so you can bring up your volume and it starts coming out the system. Give it a little bit more gain if you need it, and then you can adjust your gates and EQs and compressors as you need to. Same operation for any other parts of the system. If you were to plug in one of your 58s here, operation would be the same kind of concept everywhere across. So as with everything, you always start with your input volume, making sure your gain is set right before you turn on your channel. If you do use fan and power, you want to make sure your volume's down. Best practice is to have the channel turned off before engaging fan and power. You have to press and hold to turn fan and power on. And in this particular case, this is getting a Dante input, so it doesn't do fan and power because you can't transmit 48 volts over ones and zeros. But if you were selecting, say, this channel, you're past the wireless mics, you've got this channel could take fan and power. It's currently plugged into, or its channel is number 5 on the back here. You can press and hold and it'll turn fan and power on. And I think for some reason it's not. Oh, that's right. I remember now. I had assigned the last 8 of the channels here to the stage boxes that you guys will be getting. They're back ordered right now, but the stage boxes, there's 3 of them that are for the auditorium, and those will be able to be used with the system as well. In the meantime, you could use the inputs and outputs that are on the back. For each of your input channels, you can go in and select, if you scroll down to your input patching, you can go through and select what inputs you want those to be looking at, whether it's Dante or line in, mic, so on and so forth. So that's kind of a 10,000 foot view on the input side of your mixer. Next section to evaluate here is your sending to monitors. You don't have monitors in this space outside of what's on the ceiling. However, if you were to bring in like powered speakers to do floor monitors, you could use those by selecting one of your mix outputs. This is going to flip these faders to sending to that particular output. Turn your volume up to the whatever output you're going to, and you've got 14 mixes that are in this mixer, as well as your matrix sends. So aux sends or mixes are groups of inputs, matrices are groups of outputs, so you can put together your left-right mix, your aux 1, whatever, and have multiple outputs. Everything on a digital mixer is select based, so whatever controls you're trying to control here, you're going to want to make sure you're selecting the channel that you want to be controlling. And then on the lower section, you've got obviously solos, so you can solo a microphone. If you had a set of headphones plugged in, you'd be able to hear only that channel. It also flips your monitor meter from showing your left-right output to showing only that input if you need a more precise meter than what you're getting on the other side. You can go in, this section right here gives you your mute group, so if you hit setup, you can select your various channels to add them to your mute groups. So you hit setup, hit your mute group that you want, and select the channels that you want to put into it. And then these are your left-right faders. You can do scene recalls in here, so scenes are saved here. They have a really great series of videos on these as well, kind of 2-minute sections, so you can go through and read the manual, go through and watch the videos, and they'll help with some of the operation. On the next section here, you've got your fader layers. So layer A is 1 through 14. B is your next 8 channels, which maxes out the channels on the back. And then you've got 2 stereo channels, and you've got 4 effect returns. So you can route your inputs and outputs of your effects units. It has built-in reverb, delay, phaser, so on and so forth. Next layer down, layer C, is going to give you your mixed masters. So if you noticed earlier when I was on the input page, selected that, it turned yellow. So those correspond to here. Mix 1 is yellow, and so they color code the strips to help you know where you're at, which is kind of a cool feature to easily be able to look at your faders and know where you're at. One of the funny quirks of these, I've used these same desks outside. You can't see the colors, so it makes it really difficult to know where you're at. And then you've got your 4 matrix sends here, and then some open channels. You can reassign channels within the mixer, but just be aware that even if a channel is not on the surface, it can still be operating in the background. So if you're going to unassign a channel from the surface, say you want to assign wireless mic 1, you're going to want to make sure that channel is turned off and the fader is down before you send it off the desk, because it can still be doing stuff in the background, and that can cause a lot of heartache when you have someone talking and you don't know where they went. So that's kind of a overview of your channel assignments as they currently sit. And then you've got, if you select an output like your left-right, you can select your graphic equalizer. You can see at the top of each channel, it gives you an indication of what frequency you're looking at there. So when the faders turn red, this would start your low frequency is going to be your upper number, and then your high frequency is going to be the bottom number. So they have it's a 1/3 band graphic EQ. So you have your upper frequencies are your second set. You have to have a output selected. They work on both your mains as well as if you were to select an aux, you can do an EQ on your aux, or even if you wanted to do a matrix, you could do an EQ on your matrix as well. The trick when you're using a digital mixer like this, especially one that doesn't have an LCD screen that's going to give you an indication of where you're at, is if you are sending out to a monitor and you need to be able to know where you're at, as soon as you make your adjustment to your monitor, whatever it is, just make sure you go back to your main layer so you're adjusting your mains and you know where you're at. The other thing to be aware of, there's a few different menu options within your main menu. The most important one is going to be your show settings. So within show settings, you'll be able to go in and you can save as, which will give you the ability to save a name. I'm going to go ahead and say apply because that's the name of the current master show. It's currently saved to the internal hard drive, which they call MMC. You can select that, and then you can see there's a couple of different revisions there. Highest rev is your master. And I would encourage you to get a thumb drive that is clean, so a brand new thumb drive, and preferably less than 8 gigs. They're pretty particular about that with this manufacturer. Plug it in, and in that screen that we were just looking at, so save as, it'll ask for the name. Then if you hit that button, it's going to take you up, and your thumb drive, it'll say USB, and it'll show up there. You can scroll down to it and select it. Save your show file to the thumb drive, and then also save it to like Google Cloud or the cloud somewhere, some sort of cloud, so that you have a backup of it. That way, if you ever need to send it out to service, when you get the desk back, you just plug in your thumb drive, recall your show, and away you go. It's exactly like it was when you left it. Also, if you do a production with it, and Joe, 9th grader, comes in and he does, he reassigns channels and things are all wonky because he was pushing buttons, you can recall your show and bring it back to standard. Also, on that same setup, you can go to security, which is your bottom left-hand corner, and you can set up users and profiles so they can only affect certain controls. I don't do a whole lot. I don't do anything as far as setting up users. That's up to you guys how you want to manage it. I just set up an administrator, which gives you full capability of the console, but you could limit it down to they can only move a fader, they can only move this fader, they can only do mutes, whatever it is that you feel is necessary. So you can play around with that and decide what makes sense for you guys as a staff. And then there's a few other options within the menus. I'm not going to go super deep into that because there's not much that you're going to need on a regular basis. But again, their manual is super helpful and very intuitive, so feel free to go over the menu or over their manual, and it'll give you all the information you need in operation of the desk. So any questions on operation of the room, operation of the mixer?
So if we were to bring in monitors, those will plug into the stage boxes that are here?
You can actually plug,
Plug
if
them
they
right
were,
into
you
the-
can plug them into the outputs on the back of the mixer.
That's right, okay.
So right now, all of your mixes, your outputs start at mix 1. 1 is 1, and it follows through. So you could plug in a powered wedge or an amp to channel 1, and it would come out. You could reassign those to stage boxes if you wanted to, but right now because there isn't anything in place, they're just programmed to the back of the desk.
And then this may not be it may not be part of the system at all, but I noticed there's HDMI ports on all the walls. Do you know anything about those?
Yeah, so the way that the HDMI ports work is that's part of the classroom AV system, which there's another training video on that. But the long and the short of it is that you've got a touchscreen display, and each of those HDMI jacks, there's 2 of them. They're on opposite walls, depending on where you want to put your teaching station. If you plug into each of those, it's going to give you video and audio to the display. And then there's an audio line that comes out of the display and goes to the classroom audio system. And there's also a couple of wireless mics that you can use as well.
Okay, cool.
So that's how those work.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I have questions, but I'm going to save them for the auditorium because they're more auditorium related. So
Sure, that makes
I'll
sense.
wait.
Okay, cool. Coming in. Sounds like it, maybe. Cool. All right, so welcome to your new auditorium. My name's Remington Smith. I'm with Diversified, and I'll be walking you through systems today. So we're going to start out with general overview of the space. So think 30,000 foot view, and we'll look at various things from where we're at right now, and we're going to take a little tour around and look at where the things are actually at. Currently, I'm standing in the mix position or audio booth. And so we'll do kind of a quick overview. We'll cover parts and pieces and things like that when we get up to the control booth, because that's where most of them are. And then we'll get into operation of the space. There are 2 modes for your system. You've got an auto mode, so that it's simple and easy to approach for typical school staff. Then you've got a manual mode where you're going to have a technician who's running sound or video or whatever for the event. So those are your 2 modes for the system. Looking at the space as a whole, you have your audio mix booth, which is here. You have your control booth, which is upstairs where lighting is. The AV rack is up there. Video processor, control processor are up there. There are a number of AV panels located throughout the facility. There's one here at the mix position. There's one in the control booth. And there are 2 floor boxes. There's AV network jacks on either wall on the stage, as well as upstage and in the orchestra pit. We'll take a look at each of those so that you can get an idea of what they are and how they operate. They all have a variety of different types of connectors on them, which we'll get to when we get to those locations as to what they do and how they operate. So parts and pieces that are visible from where we're at right now. You have a portable touch panel that's located here currently. However, it can be plugged into any AV network port that you want anywhere in this part of the facility. And there's a second one that's currently in the control booth. 2 logical locations for them. Sometimes you'll see someone put them on a podium or something at the stage so that the person who's running the show, if they're one person with a laptop, can adjust their volume and play a DVD or select sources, that sort of thing.
Are there side stage connections for that AV
There are.
network?
Yep. Yeah, there's three wall plate locations on the stage and one in the orchestra pit, as well as in the floor boxes.
And does that auto configure just with any Ethernet cable? It's
Yep.
just an Ethernet in and then...
Yeah, it just, when you plug it in, it'll power up, receives power over Ethernet, PoE, and so as soon as it connects, the switch will give it power. You'll see it power on. It'll go through its startup process where it's communicating to the control processor and handshaking, all of that stuff, and then it'll load up your splash screen and you can operate. If If your system's already powered up, it'll come up in a powered on state, whatever page it's on. If the system's powered down, it'll come up to the splash screen that says Mountain View on it, which looks like this, Mountain View. So you've got a Soundcraft SI Impact here. There are 4 monitors and 4 NL4 cables for monitoring purposes at the stage. You can see them sitting on the front edge of the stage. I have them facing us just for the purpose of being able to hear what we send to them later on today. Typically they would fold back to the stage rather than out to the audience, but just for ease of understanding what's going on, I've got them facing us today.
And can you have separate monitor mixes on those 2 channels?
Yes.
Okay, but just 2, right?
Correct. There are only two monitor mix locations for passive monitors. If you were to do powered monitors, you could do more. So there's.
Because you would send them over.
You'd send them out through the stage boxes to the powered monitors. So.
But you couldn't do more mixes.
Yeah.
Oh, you could.
Yeah, you can do. This desk is capable of 14 monitor mixes and 4 matrix mixes. So the other piece of equipment that is central to your system is the projector, which is in an enclosure upstairs. And then there's the projection screen, which I just moved out a moment ago. And that projection screen was supplied by the staging company that did all the drapes and all of that. We provided the projector and dialed it into the screen, so it's all good to go.
That screen size.
Correct. And it when we get into the operation side of things, no matter where you plug in HDMI, it's going to adjust that image to fit that. It's going to scale it. So you don't have to do anything on your laptop. Just plug it in and it'll work. There are some situations where, like if you use a really cheap dongle, you may run into issues, things like that, where it's not passing that information correctly. So don't cheap out on your adapters.
Do you know how it processes, because that seemed like not a widescreen screen?
It's 1610.
Oh, okay. So it's square. I guess it's going to auto adjust the dead space to use the maximum.
Correct. It is a wide screen.
It's a wide screen, so it might leave. If we got a crappy square video, it's going to leave the black boxes on the side, but aspect ratio full.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, and that just depends on how you output that image from your laptop. If you're running a video that is square, 4:3, and you go full screen on your laptop, then it'll come out full without bars.
Oh, okay.
So, because your computer scales the image on the screen, and then this will scale it to the resolution of the projection.
Just output full screen mode on your computer and let this thing do its job.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So that's kind of 30,000 foot view. So let's take a little bit of a walk. We'll actually start in here. Sam, I'll let you bring the camera over around this other side. I'm just going to highlight it for you guys, and then you can take a look. So in this position, right now we've got one of your 2 portable control system controllers, and then you also have your wall plate underneath the desk here. It's got 2 line input XLR jacks, and then you've got your audio mixer. So the line input jacks are for the case that you have someone rent the space and they bring in their own mixer. It's so that they can plug into the system with 2 XLR cables out of their mixer into here, and it's configured for line level, so the output of their mixer will work correctly with it. You can also plug in, a phone with a Y cable or any other device that you want there that's going to be sending out line level.
And that's to the XLR, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're labeled line level.
Okay.
And then you've got 2 AVNet jacks there as well.
Okay.
And we'll get into operation on the mixer in a little bit when we get into that phase of things. And we'll also get into operation on the touch panel as well. But that's everything in this location. So from here, we'll head up towards the stage, cover the panel locations and what's there, and then we'll So we are at the first floor box. You have 2 floor boxes in your system. There's floor box 1 and floor box 2, similar locations on either side of the stage. Inside this box, you've got 4 types of connections. So you have an HDMI input transmitter that'll send video to the projector if you select it as your input source. You've got 2 microphone inputs, AV network, and a monitor output for the monitor speakers. And it's labeled as monitor 1. So if we were to go to the other floor box, it picks up where this one leaves off. So it has monitor 2, it has mic 3 and 4, and then AV network is not labeled because it goes to a network switch and they're all the same. They all do the same thing. There's nothing patchable about the AV network, so there's no need to number it. All of the connectors, with the exception of the HDMI, which is my biggest frustration with HDMI, is it's not lockable, but all of the other connectors are lockable connectors. So your mic cables, as you're used to, they have a locking connection type. The AV network is an Ethercon, so it locks just like a mic cable does. And then the monitor cable is a Speakon Neutrik, so you just pull back and twist, and that releases it. Same thing, putting it in so that it can't come loose. And they are keyed, so it'll only go in one way. As I mentioned, you've got 2 25-foot cables and 2 monitors for each send. Something to note there, when you're hooking up any number of speakers in series, the amplifier is only designed to go down to 2 ohms, so you can't put more than 3 speakers in a row. And the way that works, Ohm's law says that if you, every time you double your impedance, you drop it down. So these are 8 ohm speakers, so if you plug 2 of them together, it goes to 4 ohms. Plug 3 of them together, it goes to 2 ohms. If you go below that, you're out of spec. It will probably operate, but you're putting a lot of strain on your amplifier. It's not suggested to do more than 3. Don't drop below 2 ohms. So don't put all 4 monitors on 1 monitor send is the gist of the story there. So you've got 2 monitor sends here. The other piece of the system that it belongs at the stage typically or down in the orchestra pit is your stage boxes. So the system is designed to run a Dante audio infrastructure, and there's two or three stage boxes on this job. I don't remember how many. I've got a couple jobs in my mind, but the stage boxes are back ordered right now. So
that you're referring to like a traditional like snake.
Similar to a snake, it's the digital version.
Digital version.
So yeah, so
inputs.
correct. Yeah, it has 16 in and 8 out. Perfect. But instead of a big old multi-core snake like you're used to thinking of, you've got a network cable that comes out the back.
And there's 3 of those on this job?
There's 2 or 3. I don't recall.
Do you know what? Just so we could like look at them and get some familiarity before they get here.
I believe they changed them partway through, and I think the ones that they went to was the Allen and Heath DX168s. I think I'd have to verify that. Off the top of my head, that's the number that sticks in my mind.
Is this might be a too specific question for right now, but are those? Does that plug into these same ports here?
Correct.
Same deal.
Yep.
Okay.
And
yep.
They require power?
They do require power.
We have power here.
Yeah, so there's power in the box here. There's other receptacles around the stage as well. Obviously, you don't want to put it on dimmed power.
Right.
But yeah, so you can plug it in wherever. They do require power, so you'd need to run an extension cord to them.
Or you could base them here.
Yep,
How big
exactly.
Are they?
They're two to three rack spaces.
Yeah, like probably similar to the X18 head unit.
Yeah, Very similar in size, yeah. So that is your floor boxes. All of the other panels that you'll see at the stage are only AV network. So as I mentioned, there's one on either downstage wall on the upstage side of the downstage wall. And you'll see them there. They're just single gang plates, so they're easy to miss, so make sure you look for them.
And so you could do that right here. You wouldn't have.
Correct. You don't have to.
Box there. You
Yeah.
could put it here.
So when you say
And-
that are just AV network, as opposed to what is this?
So in this box, you've got HDMI,
Oh, that's
microphone,
excellent. Okay.
right?
But if it's Ethernet, it's the AV network.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and they are labeled AV network.
Okay.
Is there an ETA on those boxes at all?
I wish there was. Right now,
Supply.
it's supply chain issues with the pandemic being what it was. Dante, that created the concept, has a specific chipset that they use. And at the beginning of the pandemic, big companies like Cisco, Microsoft, Apple, they saw what was going to happen to the supply chain, so they put in orders for 700,000 chips. And so as soon as production came back online, the chip manufacturers started filling these massive orders. Audinate, being a smaller company, because they're a specialized company, didn't get they're just barely starting to fill their order. So right now we're waiting for supply to be filled and then shipped across the ocean so that they can be installed in devices. So it's not pretty.
Not even a month to year.
It's probably a year is what it's looking like right now. In the short term, the system has a lot of functionality, and you can rent boxes, and we can.
Maybe that's something we can talk about later today.
Yes.
About how we would do that possibly.
Yes, yeah, that's something we can look at, but that is unfortunately the nature of the environment, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
Well, if you can if you can give us some workarounds.
Yeah, totally. And it's one of those things that it's unfortunate, and I hate having to tell people, well, this is how your system will operate when it can operate once we have the part.
Here's Christmas, but you can't have the present.
Right, yeah, exactly. Anyway, that's the panels there. There is one AV network on the front center of the orchestra pit so that you could put a touch panel down there if you wanted, or you could put one of your stage boxes down there. So say you had the lid up and you had a pit orchestra and you wanted to have a box down there so you could mic everything, you could do that. Do
they daisy chain, like if you want it, or would there ever be a reason that you would want, say, that touchscreen mixer and a box? Like, is there?
You could put a small network switch in
Just a
place.
network switch would work? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
You do have to be careful with that though, because if the device, like the touch panels, require phantom power, but PoE. So you want to make sure you have PoE.
Okay.
Also, don't want to do a cheap switch because there's a lot of specific network protocols that have to happen. So you want to make sure that you use a good quality one that's Dante certified. So a Cisco switch is the primary one that's Dante certified. You just want to make sure that it's certified for what you're using it for.
There's just one AV network down there?
Correct. Okay. Yep. Cool. That was what Listen Acoustics spec the system with. And projection screen hangs on line set 4. Since we finished up here on the stage, I'm going to go ahead and bring in line set 4 so that it screens 4 speakers that are covering the auditorium. You've got 2 speakers on the proscenium wall, so you've got a left and a right. And then hanging on your back catwalk, you've got 2 delay speakers that are time aligned with those that cover the back of the auditorium. Right now, because some of the acoustics are still pending, there's a few seats in the very far back that with the reverberation of the space, the audio coverage isn't as ideal. So once those clouds go in, those seats will be the same as the rest. But without the clouds in place, there's some seats that aren't as good as others, unfortunately.
Is there stuff in the middle? You said speakers?
No,
Just left
just
and right.
Just left, right, and then delays.
And then delays. Okay.
Are those
Separately volume adjustable ever, or are they just tied together as?
They are tied together. So the reason that they're tied together is that when you engineer a system and you time align it, the phase coherence between the mains and the delays is lined up so that it's phase coherent.
Yeah.
So your image stays the same all the way across.
Right.
And then they're volume matched so that the delays kind of disappear.
Yeah.
So with that, we don't typically put, and the engineer didn't put the delays as a separate feed.
Sure.
They're tied into
But
the
the
mains.
levels also are tied together.
Yes.
That was
Yeah.
one of my bigger. Okay.
Yep.
We don't have to worry about messing.
Yeah, you don't have to. They're all pre-configured. If you ever have any issues with the system as far as it not sounding correct or anything like that, it is under warranty.
Okay.
And I believe you guys, the school district, purchased an extended warranty as well, so we support it through that whole period.
Great.
So you can reach out to our service department, and they'll send a technician out to
Awesome.
review it at any point in time.
Okay.
So feel free to utilize that resource.
Yeah.
And I know a couple of you were on emails at one point that I was on, so you probably have the email address and phone number for our support department already, so because it's in my signature.
Okay.
So with that, we're going to head upstairs to the control booth because that's our next stop. So we are in the control booth, and this is the heart of the AV system for both the auditorium and the black box. Above us here is the projector enclosure. The projector is mounted inside. I have it opened up right now so that you can see it. It's mounted in the box. There's nothing you're ever going to need to do with it. On the side of the box right now, just hanging on a piece of string, is the key to the box.
Okay.
I would suggest that you keep it tied to the box and you can just rest it up on top of the box. But you want to make sure you have that key because it is how you open and close the latches on the box. If you ever need to service it, which at some point you will need to service it, clean fans and that sort of thing, which we will do for you as part of your preventative maintenance, which is part of the contract for service. We will take care of that, but we have to have that key to be able to access the enclosure.
What is the
Do we-
service
yeah.
life of that? Usually, like, is it every year, twice a year?
I believe it's once a year. And as far as lamps and such, it's actually a laser projector, so there's no lamp needed. So you'll never have to do anything as far as lamps.
And it's just that it probably has some sort of a fan system with an air filter, like a foam thing in there
Correct.
that you wash.
Yep.
And do we need to contact you to do that once a year, or would?
I believe it is automatically scheduled. That's a great question. I'll write that down and verify with my team, but I'm pretty sure that they schedule it based off the completion of the project.
Okay. That'd be good, that we get that date in there, just so we can write that down there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will follow up with my team and the service department and verify
Yeah.
and email you guys so you know.
And we should probably it'd be nice
We'll put it
to
on our
watch
own
it,
calendar,
so we can
yeah.
just know.
Yeah.
At some point when they're not doing it, it'd be
Yeah.
nice to watch them do it, so.
Totally. And I think that's part of, I believe that's included in the closeout documents as well.
Oh,
So
okay, great.
I don't know how the management works on the school district side as to
We
who
may never
gets
see it,
that
right,
information,
yeah.
but it will be communicated in some form to the school district at some point. So with that, that's the projector and its enclosure. Right here is the heart of the whole system. So the upper half of the system from here up is your equipment for the main auditorium. This section right here is equipment for the black box. Then you've got your two listen assist devices here. This one is for your the black box. This one is for the theater. Then you've got a rack drawer. Inside your rack drawer are your wireless microphones for the theater. So you have two handhelds, TH1, TH2, There are a number of different wireless systems on campus, so all of them are labeled with the room that they belong in and what number they are. So you have theater, gym, commons, black box, and they're all labeled accordingly so you don't end up with wrong microphones in wrong spaces.
Now, do these cross over because in go into multiple spaces?
They do not. They're designed for the space specifically.
So when we had a meeting in here, the staff meeting, he had a mic that was coming through in here, and it was coming through on stage or in the commons. We had to manually mute the commons level.
Channel. We went to the touch screen out there
Mm-hmm.
and muted the wireless. And I didn't know, I don't think he had this mic.
He didn't know where the mics were. He took
He
one
had
of
a
those
commons
mics.
mic, and I unmuted the channel in here and changed the volume, and it worked.
That's really weird.
Right.
I'm not sure how that's possible because they're physically not connected.
Maybe
Well,
maybe he took this one. I don't know which mic
Well.
he had, but he had a mic and it was coming through both spaces.
We should double check.
Yeah,
that.
if you could find out what mic he had, then I can verify
I
that.
can do that today.
There's a possibility that they could have ended up, I'm just going to make a note, that they could have, they could have reprogrammed it. It could have been the same frequency. It's a little bit tricky to say.
I had told him, I said, because when he had the meeting here, I said that we don't have any audio in here yet, so he did it all on
I
his
think
own.
he did walk up here and get this. Because
Oh.
he did, I think you maybe had showed him at some point in time where some of this was.
Oh.
I think it was one of these mics.
But you
but
think
it was-
coming? We can
that's what
test
he
that
said,
at some point.
so,
Okay.
yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
Keep going.
We can look into that, but I know for a fact when I deployed the system that each microphone had its own
Gotcha,
frequency.
yeah.
Sure.
So
Yes.
it is possible to resync them to different devices, so you could have it come out of multiple places, but they should not be.
Okay.
They are all frequency coordinated so that they don't interfere. So they avoid other radio frequency devices in the area, like the walkie-talkies that some of the staff carry around.
Yep.
So that's all configured and ready to go. The other variety of wireless mic that we have in here is lapels. So there's two lapels. These just have a standard clip-on microphone. You can do a headset or a wig mic or whatever your preference is. Just get a Shure connector and it'll hook right up to them. So those are wireless mics. There's a couple of remotes in here. There's a DVD player remote and a projector remote. Projector remote, both of those remotes you'll technically very rarely need to use because you can control everything with the touch panel. Projector remote is kind of a pain to use because of the enclosure, so you have to open it and get your hand in there to get to the IR window on it. But it is possible if needed. You can control the DVD player from the touch panel as well, so it's
And there are 4 wireless then for the auditorium.
correct.
And these
And
are
our-
the receiver units that would be used in the black box? Like,
So
they live in here?
these are the receiver units for the black box. These are the receiver units for the auditorium.
Sorry, I don't know what that was. But, and then are those, say that lapel mic, is it already, so
It's
it's
synced.
is it 2 handhelds and 2 lapels? Or is
Correct,
that what it-
yeah. So you've got 1 and 2 are handhelds, 3 and 4 are lapels.
Okay.
So that's how those work. DVD player, this is your control processor. There's nothing you're ever going to need to do with it. In fact, the front touch panel controls don't do anything.
Okay.
You will get lights that light up green if you're getting signal into the device, but other than that, it just sits there and does its thing in the background. This is your wireless mic antenna combiner. So each of these mics does antenna diversity. So there's an A antenna and a B antenna, and they'll both go to this unit and the antennas that are in the room. So your transmitter transmits signal out, the antennas pick it up, they're opposite polarity so that if it drops on one, it picks it up on the other seamlessly, so there's no dropouts. This combines them all together and sends them out to the 4 units for this room. In the case that you guys are a theater and you need, at some point you're going to need more than 4 microphones, there are extra cascade outputs on the back of the antenna combiners. You can just take a 50 ohm antenna cable out to a second rack and utilize it that way. And then you can use the antennas that are in the room rather than a bunch of little antennas on the back of the units. You would need a combiner for your rack, so you'll want to make sure you have an antenna combiner. And we can, if you decide that you want to have an antenna package, that's something we can assist you with.
And is that possible if we were to say, hey, let's just make this expanded permanently? Could we?
Oh, totally.
We could add this stuff in here, I
Yeah, there's extra spaces at the top. The only thing there is that we have to close the current scope before we can do that, unless we were to do a change order or something like that. But they typically prefer to close out a project before we would do an add-on like that. But we'd be happy to come alongside you guys with that. That's not a problem. The top power supply here powers the theater system, so all the equipment for the theater. Then you've got your 2 amplifiers that power the mains and the monitors. So mains are your first 2 here, and then your delays, and then your sends for the monitors 1 and 2.
Okay. So mains and delay are all 4 mains are coming out of this.
Correct.
Oh, house. Okay.
Yep.
And the bottom is for the black box?
Correct. Yep. So that's everything in the rack. As far as operation-wise, there's very little you'll ever need to do to service it. The main thing, again, as I mentioned, we do preventative maintenance as part of all of our projects. But you want to watch your fans, make sure your amps are, the intake is from the front to the back. So you just want to make sure that there's not a lot of dust caked on here. Same thing on your DSP, you want to make sure there's not a lot of dust being sucked into the units. So it's a cleaning them up periodically thing. So the only thing that you may ever need to access in the rack is your network switch here. If for some reason your system is acting oddly, and it's specifically network devices, first troubleshooting step is just restart the switch. Okay. Sometimes switches do need to be restarted. If you plug in something and it's causing a network storm or an IP conflict, sometimes you have to reboot the switch. So that's where that's at. And then as far as antennas are concerned, you've got your cascade outputs on your antenna combiners that you could plug in your wireless mics to the antennas. Otherwise, everything else is dressed in, and you'll never need to do anything with it.
Output, or how many more are there on this antenna combiner?
So you just have just the 2 cascade outputs.
So you'd have to buy another.
So you could technically you could put 2 more wireless receivers with
one
this
more
combiner.
You could do 1 more.
Oh, because it's AB. Sorry.
Right.
Okay,
yes.
1 more.
The antenna combiners are designed for 4 wireless mics per combiner.
Okay.
There are combiners that will do 8, but this particular one does 4.
Okay.
So you could add 1 more combiner to it, or 2?
You could add as many combiners as you want.
No, you mean 1 more
You could add one more wireless receiver, but if you wanted to do more than 1, then you would need to add a combiner.
The combiner. How many combiners can I put into that?
Well, they would daisy chain, so you'd go, you'd do cascade to your next combiner and cascade to your next combiner.
So this is for directly from your
antennas that are mounted on the rail into the combiner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I got you.
Well, I know it for you.
I got you.
It doesn't.
So this thing just combines all the antenna signals and sends them to the wireless receivers.
We buy a new combiner, we can put 4 more wireless mics
Correct.
in.
Yeah.
Right, and that goes in, that new combiner that I bought
Would go in here.
goes
So
up
you-
there, but gets plugged into where?
That would be,
Oh, I
that would
see.
be the second piece of it, is that you would need a Dante interface device.
So that's Dante, so it doesn't even go into this one.
It would go, so you have two parts to any wireless mic system.
Okay,
You have your RF or radio frequency, which is the transmission,
okay,
and then you have your audio output.
okay.
And so depending on the mics you use and how you want to utilize them, if the mics do Dante out, it's just a matter of network cables to the network switch and configuration for Dante. If they only do analog out, then you'd need a Dante interface, like a stage box or something like that.
And you're
with a
talking
preamp.
about those combiners, whether they're Dante out, or you're just talking about the mic?
The mic system itself. So you have,
Okay.
again, you have two halves to your wireless mic system. You have the transmission antenna system, which is the combiner.
Okay.
And then you have the audio system, and the audio system is either analog or digital.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yes, I got, yes.
So there's not
So Is
much.
your question mark, how would we get a new combiner connected to those antenna receivers?
Yeah, at that point it would just be antenna cables out of Cascade into the next combiner. Does that make sense?
And Cascade is like a daisy.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Now, I noticed these receiver units do have Ethernet out, but they're hooked up with XLRs.
Yeah, so the Ethernet on these is for network control, not audio.
Got it. Okay.
So they just give you monitoring. They give you the ability to change frequencies,
Yep.
use the Shure Wireless Workbench, that sort of thing. But they don't do audio. This particular series doesn't do Dante.
Totally.
The next step up does do Dante, but these ones don't do
Is there an
Dante.
advantage one way or the other in your?
They both have their own advantages. Dante is really nice because it's super flexible. It can also be a little bit challenging making sure that the network is stable and ready to go. And there's a pretty large learning curve to understanding Dante. Because there's a lot that goes into it, and before you get into any kind of Dante configuration, you want to make sure that you are certified or you're working with someone who's certified by Dante, because it's very particular.
Okay.
There's a lot of nuances to it, and if you adjust the wrong thing, you'll make the whole system stop working.
Okay.
So there's some very, very particular things to Dante. So from a user's perspective, analog is going to be the simplest route.
Can you talk about? I've never used this.
Yeah.
That unit.
So the ALS system. So ALS stands for Assisted Listening System, and we're required by law to provide a certain amount of receivers per seats. So we've provided those for this system. There's a system for black box, for commons, for gym, and for the auditorium, just because of the capacity of the spaces, or potential capacity of the spaces. And there's not a whole lot that you have to do as far as the system is concerned.
Okay.
The units themselves are in the box behind you here, and I can pull one out and show you. So a couple of things to note with these guys. Let's see if I grabbed one that I've configured yet. I did. So these are what the receivers look like. And on the top is the power button. Push and hold, it'll power on. It's going to give you your unit number. This one needs to be charged. It'll tell you what the battery is, and then it'll tell you what room it's for. This one's for theater. It just turned off because it needs charged. But it'll say theater on it, and
On the welcome.
on the welcome screen. It works for either an earbud. We provided single earbuds with the system that were spec'd for it. I use in-ear monitors when I'm testing them to make sure they're working correctly. You can use, if someone has hearing aids that can use a T-coil, you can use a T-coil and plug it into the unit as well.
And it's just a 3.5?
Just a 3.5,
Okay.
Unless you're using the T-coil, and then the T-coil goes from one side to the other.
Okay.
There was not T-coils spec'd with the system, so we didn't provide them, but they can be purchased separately.
So, and then when people usually request this, in your experience, I mean, are they requesting that unit plus an earbud, or do they, I've never used
it varies.
Okay.
It varies.
So just have them ready.
Yeah, just have them ready. Typically, I have them at the box office
Okay.
and let front of house people manage them.
Okay.
As far as audio getting into the system, there's nothing that you need to do. If there's audio that's coming out of the system, there's audio that'll come out of the ALS, so it just operates.
Okay.
It's all pre-configured. It happens in the DSP, so the signal processor for the system mixes the audio and sends it out, so nothing that needs to be done from that perspective. There are some chargers that are forthcoming for these. There was a change order for that so that you guys could charge the units.
Oh.
In the meantime, they just charge with a micro USB.
And is it like, you mean like a rack? Does it rack like
It's
a little
it's not
receiver,
rack mounted, but yeah, it's
but like a desktop?
it's a desktop unit. It's about this big,
in.
and you can plug them in and charge
Got
them.
it. Perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a little contact on the back that
Oh,
they
yeah. Perfect.
plug in with. Same thing with the wireless mics. They can charge the same way. The consultant didn't spec the rechargeable batteries and charger, but you can go ahead and purchase them if you wanted to. Otherwise, they just run on AA's. The cool thing about the rechargeable batteries is that they tell you exactly how many minutes of charge time you have left. So you know, okay, instead of guessing, well, I've got 1 bar and it's going to last me until the end of the scene, you know, okay, this scene is 3.5 minutes long and I have 4 minutes. We're okay.
And are those, so the last set we had, they were the battery pack that charged in the receiver unit. So you're saying if we upgrade the rechargeables here, it's now a micro USB charger?
No, they have a
Or a stand?
proprietary stand.
Got it. For the mic itself or for the battery? Do you pull the battery?
Either one.
Either.
Yeah, there's contacts on the mic as well as you can remove the battery and charge them. So if you buy a couple of extra batteries, you can have some that are live and then have some in the charger and switch them out. Or you can, if you're only using it for a short period of time, you can just dock the microphone between uses. And they'll run on normal AA's or rechargeable batteries as well, standard rechargeable AA's. Make sure if you do the rechargeable AA's that you get like good quality ones, because rechargeable batteries vary a lot and their service life varies a lot. So getting good quality ones is very important. So that's the equipment rack. There's not a whole lot that you'll ever really have to do with it. DSP's here. It's all configured. There's nothing that's user serviceable that you'll need to get into there. If you're ever having interference issues with the microphones, you can change the frequencies on them, but it is pretty unlikely that you're going to have any issues based off of the scans that were taken. You should be pretty clear. So, and if you ever have any issues with the system, you can reach out to us and we'll help you get it resolved.
Okay.
We recording?
Yep.
Cool. So we're going to go over the automatic mode of operation. So the idea of this is that it makes it intuitive so that someone who doesn't know anything about a soundboard can walk in, use a microphone, put an image on the screen, make something happen. As I previously mentioned, you can take the portable touch panel and plug it into one of the AV network jacks at the stage. So you could actually have it sitting on the podium with their laptop. They have their microphone on a stand. They can make the whole show happen from the podium if they needed to. With that, when you come in, you're going to see your splash screen. At the bottom, it says touch to begin. So you can just tap the screen. It's going to boot up.
Get closer.
Yep, totally. As it goes through that process, it's turning everything on, making sure all the routes are happening. When it comes up, it's going to ask you what your sources are. So AV sources is any of your HDMI ports or your Blu-ray player. So you can go through stage 1 is your first floor box. When you select a source, it's going to automatically, what it's doing right now is it's automatically powering on the projector. So it's up there. You can see the green light started blinking on the front of it. So it's powering up. And that's what that progress bar is doing. It's turning on the projector. Because the projector doesn't automatically turn on when the system comes up, there's no reason to burn the projector all the time. So if you're not going to use a source, you can just move to one of your other pages and continue on. And you can see it's powering up. So there's a little bit of a startup process to the projector. There is a projector mute, so you can power it on, and then you can just mute it, and it'll blank out the image. There's also, on the system control page, we'll get to it in a little bit, but you've got controls for the projector itself, so you can power it up and down independently on the side of the screen, as well as your image mute. And jumping over here, so you've got your 4 HDMI locations. So you've got stage left, stage right. That's house perspective. I don't know why they did the floor boxes house perspective instead of stage perspective. Don't get me started on that. But at any rate, that's the way the prints were, so that's the way it's installed. And then you've got an HDMI here, which is labeled as mix, and then there's one in the control booth right underneath the lighting system. And then obviously Blu-ray. If you select Blu-ray, it's going to give you Blu-ray player on the screen, as well as the controls for it. As you can see, I didn't bring the screen all the way to the same location as it was when it was set, because it's not spiked. So you'll want to make sure that the screen is at the right elevation.
There's a floor stop.
Yeah.
Spike it to the right spot.
But yeah, you'll want to spike it so that you know where it's at. So you've got all your standard controls that you would have on the remote on the Blu-ray player. You can close that so you can get back to your controls. If you select another input source, it'll switch over to that source and do all its communication. Moving to the right, you've got your wired mics. So you've got the 4 wired mics that are in the floor, and there's 2 controls to those. You've got your manual controls here. You have an overall volume for all microphones. So if you turn it all the way up, say you're all the way at the top there, and you still don't have enough, you've got a second volume control that you can turn up. And it is stable and safe all the way up to full volume. Then in the back end, in the DSP, it has an auto mixer that's automatically adjusting those levels. So if you have multiple mics on stage, they can all turn them on, and whoever's talking, it's an unmute and turn the volume up on that channel. And then when they're not talking, it'll turn it off. So you don't have a bunch of open microphones at the same time.
Is it a gate system?
It's kind of a gate. It's an automatic system that does that in the background. It's called an automatic mic mixer.
Oh.
So.
And if you ever had both of these on, you have to manually go in between auto and manual mode. So
Yep.
you're never going to be arguing between these two.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it switches a preset and disconnects the console. You'll still see signal here, but it's
Sure.
not sending audio out.
And anything you do isn't going to do it.
Correct. You're not going to
Okay.
get
And,
anything.
and where, is there a place where you manually set that to
Yeah.
tell this one versus that?
Yeah, it's under the system control page,
okay.
which we'll get to that in a
Okay,
minute. The next tab over is your wireless mics. So again, you've got the 4 wireless mics, 2 handhelds on channel 1 and 2, and 2 lapels on 3 and 4. You've got volume up, down, and mute in the middle. And mute will light up red so that you can see that it's muted.
And speech volume will simultaneously control wired and wireless.
Correct. All microphones. And when you power the system down and power it back up, it'll automatically reset all the levels to nominal.
Okay.
So if you come in and the system's on and things are acting kind of oddly, reboot the system. It'll reset it to known values. Media volume on the other side, since we were just talking about speech volume, media volume is your inputs from the HDMI plates. So anywhere that you have those plugged in, you can control that on the...
Are there any 1/8 inch? There's no 1/8 inch. It's just meant to be HDMI in those bottom plates?
Correct.
Like if you had some, I don't know, maybe.
You'd have to use a direct box and turn it to XLR
turn it
probably.
to
Yeah.
XLR, right? Okay.
Yep. That would be the way to do the analog audio, or
I'm just thinking, if you had somebody up there that didn't need screen but had a computer or a dongle that wanted to play something from there,
sure.
go DI that.
Yeah, and you could take their HDMI signal out of their computer, and then just turn the
Just not have
projector
the
off.
Projector off, and that would still feed.
It would still feed the audio
Projector
through.
mute.
Yeah,
Okay,
probably.
it's a pass through then.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're separate systems. So you have your audio system, you have your video system. So you could turn off the projector and still get
It's
the audio
all
off
done
of
through
it.
that smart
Correct.
DSP or whatever that is.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, the audio, even if you left the projector off, the
It's
audio
a
would come
pass-through.
over the.
Correct. Yeah, because the control processor takes the audio and the video and it splits the audio and sends it to the DSP or the console,
Yeah.
and then in the video it sends to the projector.
Oh, perfect.
So it splits right there at the control system. So they operate independently.
Okay.
So projector mute's just going to turn off the screen.
Correct.
Okay.
You can also you can actually turn off the projector itself. So if you go to system control, that's a great segue going into system control. So you have audio source. So right now we're talking about auto mode where you're controlling from here. The other side is projector control. Right now it's dark green saying that it's on. You can mute it and it'll take a second for it to acknowledge that you muted. It just has to communicate back and forth and say, hey, are you muted? And then it'll talk back and say, yes, I'm muted, and it'll mute. So you have to give it a second. Same thing when you unmute it, tap it, it'll communicate, and then it'll say it's off.
Communicates better than our kids do.
Right? If only my 4 kids communicated that well. And then you can also turn off the projector. So again, you got to wait a couple of seconds for it to go through its process, and then it'll power down. Once it's fully down, it'll go to projector off. There's a little bit of a wait period there as it's cooling down, and once it's fully down, then it'll say, hey, I'm
Okay.
off.
So we can tell people with like trigger finger that just
Yeah,
touch
just
it
wait.
once
Calm
and let
down.
it go.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. You see there, it's off.
Okay.
So that's everything as far as the auto controls are concerned. Do you have any questions on auto mode?
Can you explain again the automatic mute or unmute with those mics? You said if someone's talking into it, it's going to automatically unmute.
Correct.
Is there
Yeah.
a delay?
No, it's
So it's not going to be like check. And
very, very quick.
I'm wondering though about, well,
Can you ever
finish.
turn that off?
Because I'm
Yeah.
wondering about if I was to use that in a performance,
Yeah.
the manual, like, let's say, the jazz band's playing and I want to use those 2 wireless mics as part of, for solo mics. It's going to be quite a bit of signal when it's not being used, but then somebody's going to be right on it for a solo. Should I move? I guess my question, can I mess with that? Or when I go to manual mode, does that turn off?
When you go to manual mode, it turns off. It bypasses that feature.
Yeah.
And then proximity to the mic, because I'm wondering that too. Like, could I just have it set, and then if I have a soloist come forward to the mic, like, what's the sensitivity on the mute to unmute?
It's pretty. You can be. I test it both right up on the microphone and then holding it kind of mid-chest, like someone who doesn't know how to hold a microphone.
Right. Okay.
To make sure that it still will release so that they can use the microphone.
So we'll just have to experiment.
Okay.
It
Yeah,
might
just
be feasible,
play
but
with it.
In
Okay.
the end, we can
We can
going
always-
to
We can go
manual
manual.
takes
I was
that
just,
out.
Yeah.
I was just
It'd be
curious.
nice
Yeah.
if we didn't have to
I
go
was
to
like, then I
manual.
don't have to
Maybe
worry
sometimes
about
if
it.
it was a low
Yeah,
kind of
and
thing.
it should operate just fine for you.
But if we're finding that, that this mic that's kind of just hanging out in front of the big band is
Is actually
firing
amplifying,
on,
yeah.
the easiest solution is just go to
Go
manual.
manual.
Well, or you can just go to your wired mics and
You could
Somebody
mute
can,
them.
somebody
You
can
could
mute it.
manually mute it.
Yeah,
from there.
you
So
could-
if
you
you
could-
do manually mute it here, it's going to stop that mute unmute function.
Well,
Correct.
Altogether.
Yeah.
It just-
Just like a regular if you muted it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Exactly.
Okay.
So this is your primary level control and mute, just like you would have on a console. And then you have your secondary function of the automatic mixing.
Does the automatic mixing also apply to the wired ports on stage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all 8 inputs. And then obviously power is pretty intuitive. It'll power down, take you back to your splash screen, reset all the settings.
Were you asking the wired?
The XLR.
The wired
on
also
stage
runs under that
boxes,
same gate functionality. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
if it's on this auto mode.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not in auto mode, it bypasses that and sends it out to the console directly.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yep. So with that, any other questions on auto mode? Cool.
So the 2 line inputs under the desk, those don't fall under that.
They don't. They're in your manual mode, and the reason for that is so that in that particular case, typically that's going to be someone bringing in their own mixer, and generally speaking, you're going to want to have someone making sure that their levels are reasonable, making sure they're not going to cause any damage to anything. So those levels get routed through Dante into the console, and then you have a level control
So
to manage
if someone
that.
brought in their own console and plugged into those inputs, you would still have to have this console here as well?
Yes,
Okay, and that signal kind of runs through this console.
correct. It doesn't get any extra conversion from analog to digital. It just does the one conversion from their console into the system, then it turns into Dante and comes to the console. So sometimes people will ask, if you're doing extra conversion, because every time you convert a signal, it's like back in the old days when we do, convert an MP3
Yeah.
4 or 5 times and then it sounds super grainy. That's not happening in this scenario.
Is this the only board? Is there one up top?
No, this is the only one.
This is the only one.
Yep. This mixer could, if you wanted to, you could move it. You could put it side stage. You could put it upstairs. It just needs power and it needs the AV network. But it can be located anywhere that you have an AV network jack. And if you had a show coming in and you needed to be able to do monitors, you could have someone configure Dante and use one of the 3 portable mixer carts as a monitor mixer, and do a digital split in Dante and do a monitor mixer at the stage. There's all kinds of options. Obviously, you're not going to want to run audio in the control booth because it's going to sound really bad. You're inside a box.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, there's lots of flexibility built into the system. So, and this, if you were to move it to another location, it's literally just plugging it in. It's going to operate the same here as it would plugged into any other AV network jack. So on the back of the unit, we're going to transition over.
Before I forget.
Yes.
If you were to, AV network only lives in here. You couldn't
Correct.
use this out in the student center and have a more complicated audio setup out there, right? That's just set up
They already have that built in there. They have a portable mixing cart for
you
that
can-
system
okay,
and a
so-
couple monitors.
So there's one in the gym,
There's one in the gym.
there's one in the student center,
Yep.
and one in the black box.
Correct.
Would there ever be a way to run a signal from here to the gym and the commons?
Not currently.
So you couldn't, like I'm just imagining an overflow crowd situation.
Right.
You couldn't, because we have some video, like if we were to send that out.
You would have to install some tie lines between the theater control booth and those spaces. And this consultant didn't spec those.
Yeah.
Totally possible. We do it all the time, but it just wasn't spec'd into the system.
Might be easier to just live stream it and then just.
Yeah, that's
pull it
another
up
that's
out
another
there
solution.
In the.
Yep.
okay.
That's another way that you can get at it. But it,
Yeah.
if you were to run, in this day and age, you can do everything over Cat5. So if you were to utilize some Cat5 connections, if you coordinated with your IT department, they may even have some patchable ports that you could utilize to get to those spaces. Because usually you'll have, in their network racks, you'll have a network patch. So you could take it out of the switch and just patch port to port and get from here to there or wherever.
Did you have anything to do with that camera? What is that camera called? The PTZ? Was that anything to do with you?
Nope. Yeah, that was not my
I just didn't know,
scope.
do those have audio built into them, the PTZs?
I don't know if that one does or not.
I think it takes, yeah, I don't know.
I'm gonna grab a drink here real
Yeah,
quick while we're
I'm
talking.
just thinking about live streaming
Right.
and audio, like are we gonna have to, we got the camera, because we used to set
I
up
think
our
it-
own setup, but now we still might have to set up our own audio.
I think it takes it
What?
from the board. Is what he said in
But we don't
in
have
Yamaha.
anything, you know what I mean? There's
Yeah,
no
there's no-
house, there's
Yeah.
no like, you know,
I'm just trying to think what he talked about, what Matt talked about from you. what
He's
they did
coming
with
Friday.
Union.
Yeah, he'll be
So-
here tomorrow, so that's a good match.
Yeah, I would follow up with them.
okay.
From an AV perspective, my scope of work does not have any connection to that system currently.
Okay.
So anything is possible in the realm of AV,
sure.
but under the current scope, that is not currently designed into the system. But again, those things are things that can be sorted out.
Are there any, I'm just sorry, I'm sidetracking, and I know it's not on your scope, are there any inputs in the booth? I'm just trying to, I'm kind of problem solving a little bit about this idea, like, of trying to get a microphone, you know, I'm thinking, like an orchestra concert, there's no mics going other than a talking mic, but I'm trying to get a signal sent out for the live stream, so I've got to get like a, you know, couple of giant condenser mics, full coverage. And a lot of times I would put those in the back in the old space, but there's no ports back there, is there?
There is not. However, there's a couple of ways you could get at that. You could utilize the stage boxes once you have them.
Once I have them, yeah, because there is AV network up there.
There is, yeah. And that network switch in the back of the rack, any of the ports on it, there's like 20 open ports. You can just plug into it and those stage boxes will work. And we'll configure those as soon as they arrive. We'll configure them so that everything communicates as it's supposed to.
Okay.
I kind of have another similar but unrelated.
Sure, go ahead.
And I probably know the answer to my own question, but I figure I'll ask. So I know there was no like comms or anything spec for this space. There's no clear comm or anything like that.
Unfortunately, yes.
We did bring our old system, but because everything's Dante, there's no analog. There's no way to connect that up. Am I correct in saying that? Because I know they're basically kind of phantom power. They send power over.
Yeah, it's not necessarily phantom power because it's actually on a different pin. Phantom power is 48 volts on pin 1. ClearComm is 30 volts on pin 2. Yeah, technically there's not infrastructure in place for that currently.
Aside from like running hundreds of feet of XLR through the cow lines.
Correct. Luckily you can run hundreds of feet of ClearComm. But yeah, at this point, there are wire paths to floor boxes and stuff, so there's ways that it could be done, but it would be a change order at this point.
Just out of curiosity, do you know of any comm systems that run on Dante?
There are a number of comm systems that run on Dante. Yeah, there's a number of different network-based systems. There's also wireless-based systems. ClearComm has their FreeSpeak system, which is pretty stable. It's a little spindy, but it is a pretty solid system. And most network-based comm solutions will have a Dante card option. Again, you're going to run into the same problem with Dante in those that we're having with those stage boxes. Unfortunately, unless you can find someone who has stock, it's going to be hard to get a hold of those for a little while. But there are ways to do that. The other option is there are interface cards that you can get. So you can, with a Clearcom system, you can drop the voltage off of pin 2 using an adapter. Most manufacturers sell adapter cards that'll adapt it from Clearcom to another manufacturer or Clearcom to audio, and then you can actually just cut pin 2 as well on the mic cable that you're using and then label it, obviously. And then you could use they make Dante Avio adapters. It has a network jack on one side and 2 either male or female XLRs on the other end, and then you can route those through to the Dante system that way. So that would be one way that you could work around that in the short term to get an analog system in there. So there's some ways that you can engineer that to make it work, but yeah, there's some very specific things you have to do to get there.
Yeah.
So.
Is there a cover for this board?
There is not. It didn't ship with one. I've been using the plastic bag that it shipped in,
Okay.
but it wasn't spec'd and it didn't come in the box, so there is not a dust cover for
Does
it currently.
Soundcraft make one?
I would imagine that they do. Most manufacturers do. I can't say for certain. Bed sheets work too. I have an old analog desk in my studio that I use a bed sheet on, so because they don't make a cover for it.
Okay.
It works. You just need something to keep the dust off. So.
Right.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other questions for manual mode before we shift over to or auto mode before we shift to manual mode rather? Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So again, as I mentioned, there's no power on, power off sequence because it's all transmitting digitally. So it doesn't matter whether your system's on, console's off, what the order is, you power things on and off in. So to go to manual mode, you'll select system control, and then you're going to select manual console. And you, on the back of the unit, I always forget which side it's on. This side is where your power supply is, so there's a little toggle switch. You'll power it on. It'll take a second to power up. It'll light the screen. It'll flash and reset the faders. And it's going to take about 30 seconds to a minute to boot up, which is a pretty standard boot up time. It's going through all its checks and balances, figuring out where it's at, loading its show file. It's a computer, so it's just booting up. And so it'll go through its process, booting up, and getting all of its sequencing happening. While it is booting up, we'll go ahead and start just kind of going over the layout of the console. So you've got your channel controls, which we'll go in depth on here in a minute. Then you've got your control screen, your meter section, faders, which are assignable, output faders, mute groups and VCAs, layer controls, cue list, storage, assignment there. And the bottom of the screen, you've got your effects set up so you can get into your effects. And then you've got your assignments for your faders to send signal out to your various mixes. So that's kind of a 10,000 foot view of the layout of the mixer. I'm going to start on the input side and work to the output side, as is typical with when you walk up to a system. So all of your inputs that were available on your mixer, so your 8 microphones, 4 wireless, 4 wired, your program audio, and your line level all come to the console. So your first 4 wireless are on channels 1 through 4. Your 4 wired mics are labeled mic 1 through 4, which is reflected on the plates up on the stage, on the screens there. Mm-hmm. And then you've got line 1 and 2, and then program left and right, which is your media volume on the touch panel.
The line 1 and 2 is what's coming in under.
Correct.
Neat.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I also have, which I'll get to you guys, I have a Excel spreadsheet that's the patch sheet for this console, and there's a tab in the workbook for each of the consoles on campus. So you have an easy reference of what's on what channels. And that gives you the ability, it's something I provide because I'm an audio engineer and I do freelance work on the side. And so that's a document that I live and die by.